What's going on, everybody? It's Achilles LBT coming at you with a brand new build video. And before I get into it, today's character of choice will be Sylvanas, who is a range specialist. But again, before I get into it, I mentioned it in the comment section of my last video for the Butcher. I do again actually want to take this moment to apologize and for the lack of game audio on the last one. I just realized the reason why I didn't have any game audio is because I did not have my software set to line the exact line that gets everything in one shot. It's a very rookie mistake, and again I apologize for it, and I'm pretty sure it will not happen again. So moving along to today's choice hero, and again the other thing, it's really fucking hot where I am, so I'm leaving my fan on, and if it comes through on the mic at times, I apologize for that in advance. But the last few videos I've made where I've left it off, I've been kind of sweating like by the time I finish the videos, and I don't feel like doing that right now. So without further ado, let's run through Sylvanas' abilities, and then after we do that, we will get into the build, because this is kind of a hot topic kind of character in my opinion. So we'll get into a few things. First of all, I want to just point out that I think the medium difficulty rating is actually fairly accurate, because she's not necessarily the most complex character in the game to use, but at the same time, she's not so simple that a noob can pick her up and just drop like the kind of numbers that you're expected to drop. Let me put this out there, because I mentioned this in another video with this hero, but when it comes to Sylvanas, you're pretty much expected to average at least 100,000 siege damage with this hero, at least, depending on how the game is going. So this is definitely not the kind of hero that anybody could just throw on and put up 100,000 without knowing anything about her or knowing how to build or anything like that. So moving on to her Q. And that's my personal opinion, because I've seen it and it's happened to me, so that's just my personal opinion. So moving on to her Q ability is Withering Fire. She shoots an arrow at the closest enemy, gains charges when enemies are killed. So basically, she shoots the closest enemy for 25 damage, preferring heroes, and it stores up to 5 charges, and the cooldown is only 2 seconds. It's like virtually nothing. So the little kick down there you see is that you gain 1 charge on nearby enemy minion or mercenary deaths, and 3 charges on nearby enemy hero deaths. So the thing about this ability is that this is going to be like for clearing lanes, because that's basically what you want to do with a Sylvanas. You definitely want to push lanes. Like, this is the upside of this character, is that she can effectively push lanes by herself without anybody helping her really. And her Withering Fire is the biggest weapon at her disposal for doing this. And the thing about this ability, and we're not going to get into quick cast or anything like that, the thing about this ability is that you could either hold down the Q to burst off your 5 charges, or you can tap it as fast as you can. Me personally, I'd recommend tapping it, because it's a lot faster than holding it, but that's just me. And again, I'm not going to get into quick cast or anything like that, so we're just going to move past that. Going on to her W. Her W is Shadow Dagger, damages an enemy over time and spreads, deals 10 damage and an additional 40 damage over 2 seconds to target unit. The effect spreads to nearby targets. Now, the thing about this ability that's very handy is that last little part right there. This is basically the ability that you want to use to initiate, either be it against heroes or against minions, like clearing out a wave or anything like that. And the thing that I love about the Shadow Dagger is that no matter which you target, the poison spreads, like, no matter what. So if you throw it at a hero who's not around minions, but when you connect with this ability, if he happens to run, if he or she happens to run past minions just shortly after you land a dagger on them, the poison still spreads to the minions, and it paralyzes them for a few seconds. So this is definitely a very handy ability, and this is definitely what you want to use to initiate on targets. The cooldown is 10 seconds, which depending on your timing could be either bad or good. I personally think it's fair. I think it's just right. Moving on to her E. Haunting Wave deals damage and allows teleportation. Sends forth a wave of banshees, dealing 30 damage to all targets. Reactivate to teleport to the banshee's location. Now that right there is exactly what makes this ability a money ability. I'm just looking down to make sure my mic's not muted. Basically, in my opinion, the only need you have of Haunting Wave is for escapability. Yes, it does some damage, but it's really not going to do a lot of damage. Like, there's only really 2 uses for this move, basically. In my opinion, the way I use this character, one is to escape, as I said, because you send them out in a certain direction, and then you hit the E button again to teleport, excuse me, to where your banshees are at the moment. You press E again to teleport there. Now that's one use. The other use is to like whenever I'm like going at multiple like targets, like if I'm trying to take down a siege tower and my withering fire is not recharged up to 5 charges, because I do believe that you're at your best when you let it recharge all the way back up to 5. So basically when you poison people with Sylvanas, you paralyze them, so they're not able to attack you at all. They just kind of freeze. The haunting wave gives, like, every single ability she has gives off this effect, and we'll get into that with her trait. But everything you do that attacks enemies paralyzes them. As far as minions and mercenaries, you're not going to paralyze heroes, but you will damage them and poison them over time depending on your build. So the only other use for haunting wave, in my opinion, is if you have multiple targets and you don't have anything else. Like if you're shooting at one siege giant and then another siege giant is on the side while you're letting your abilities recharge, you can shoot your waves at the second siege giant to get him to stop attacking you while you're working on the first one. So those are basically the two uses: escapability and basically like a diversion, like something to just hold off like other waves. And this is also a good little initiate attack if you don't have your dagger on hand. This is something good to throw at turrets too, because the turrets will get paralyzed off of this as well, and they won't be able to fire at you. So moving along to her trait, and this is really the big thing that makes Sylvanas the pusher that she is: black arrows, attacks and abilities stun minions, mercenaries, and towers. Again, this is basically an ability that paralyzes the 3 aforementioned targets. This is exactly why Sylvanas is expected to have the numbers in games that she's expected to have. But again, you have to really understand how this works in game, like with practice and a better understanding of what you're doing, what you're supposed to be doing. This becomes like your best friend, basically. Like her trait is just ginormous for this kind of hero. Moving along to her heroic: Wailing Arrow, fire arrow that damages and silences enemies. The mana cost is definitely kind of high. I guess it's on par with the typical heroic, but the cooldown of 90 seconds is not. I guess it's not the worst thing in the game, but it's definitely not a sexy cooldown for a heroic. The thing about this is, though, it's definitely the only viable heroic for Sylvanas. I would not go with Possession at all, and when I get to that ability, I will tell you why. But Wailing Arrow, you shoot an arrow that can be reactivated to deal 140 damage in silencing enemies in an area, making them unable to use abilities for 2.5 seconds. The arrow detonates automatically when it reaches maximum range. Now, mind you, this is the part of the heroic that I actually forgot about: the reactivation phase. Like, you definitely don't want to shoot the arrow and forget to hit your R key again, because then essentially it becomes a waste, because it'll just go more like, the chances are it'll go right past the intended targets, because typically you want to shoot this thing when you can see exactly where the targets are, and you're not necessarily using this arrow like for damage necessarily. You're using it for that silence effect that comes with it. You shoot this right in the middle of like a group of heroes, like in a mosh pit, and for 2.5 seconds they can't do anything. They're basically reduced to just basic attacks, auto attacks. Like, they have none of their abilities at all for 2.5 seconds. So you definitely only want to make it a habit of using this heroic when you have multiple targets, and like especially in team fight scenarios, it's the very thing that can get an entire team to kind of like backpedal a little bit while your teammates kind of push forward on them and maybe turn the tide. Like, it is that kind of heroic. So moving on to Possession, for the sake of finishing out these abilities, it's it only costs 20 mana. It's got a 12-second cooldown. This is basically something that could have been could have been used as a regular ability, but obviously it's too strong to be a regular ability, so it got passed down to a heroic by default, I think, because it forces an enemy minion to fight for you. It gains 20% attack damage, and it costs 5 charges to convert a catapult minion. Now, I feel like this is kind of self-explanatory as to why this is not really something you want to go with, because it's just minions that fight for you, and it's really not till level 20, I believe, that you can actually upgrade this to have mercenaries fight for you. And that's way too long to have an ability like this that just really isn't worth the effort. So, minions, you want to kill minions with Sylvanas. You don't want to convert them. Like, they're part of your farm. They're part of your entire reason for being a factor in the game. So you definitely don't want to waste a heroic ability on something that, it transforms something that you could be taking down in a matter of seconds. And with this build, especially in the late game, you will definitely be taking down waves in seconds. Like, it is that serious, especially if your trigger finger is fast. You're going to have, like, such an easy time pushing lanes with this build. Now, getting into the talents builds, and this is already where it's going to get into a kind of a touchy situation, depending on who's watching this video, because I'm well aware of certain talents that get picked because they're viewed as the winningest talent builds for this character on Hot Slogs. And I already did a video about how I feel about the website, so I'm not going to rehash old grounds, but typically what you see people, Hot Slogs users, what you see them going with is with the wind, which increases the Withering Fire range by 25%. Mind you, Withering Fire's range by itself, by default, is not bad at all. It doesn't need to be increased because the range is good enough as it is. And if it's that serious and somebody's like really pressing you, you have your Banshees on deck to escape. There's no need to add range to an ability like this, and it just boggles the mind that people think that this is a really good talent to start off with, especially seeing as this is a kind of talent that has no effect on the end game, really. Like, has none whatsoever. It just adds range, and that's it. It doesn't add any damage. Like, there's no speed increase. There's nothing. It just makes the shot longer. And I personally don't favor any talent that increases the range of anything. And to be brutally honest, whether it's this character with the wind, it's Kerrigan with her grasp. Granted, I understand why people extend that one, but I just don't think it's a good talent to pick with her. Sonya's getting the longer Spear of the Ancients. Like, it just it becomes a crutch, basically, where it's something that's taken up a spot that you could learn to play without. Like, that's what I'm trying to get at. You could learn to play effectively with the range they give you. You don't need to increase it. So I think this is a complete waste. Lost Soul reduces Shadow Dagger cooldown. Again, if the cooldown reduction was more, like 3 or 4 seconds, I'm going to say 4 because 3 seems kind of trivial seeing as it's 2. But if the cooldown reduction was 4 seconds, because mind you, I believe it's a 10-second, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it's a 10-second cooldown. If it was 4 seconds, it would be more, this would be viable. Like, I feel like this would be a good pick. But if it was 4 seconds, then it would be kind of cheap. It wouldn't be fair because you'd be throwing these things out like left and right, like it'd be no challenge. So I do think that this is something that I guess improves your cooldown, but again, this has no effect on the end game, in my personal opinion. You don't want to go with talents that are only noticeable early. You want to go with talents that are noticeable as soon as you pick them, all the way through to the end game, in my personal opinion. You could go down the line of any one of my build videos, and they are filled with talents that have some kind of, relevance throughout the game. Some of them from like the start of the match all the way through to the end of them, if they have those abilities. Corruption, basic attacks destroy ammo. This is actually something that would be really handy, except for the fact that you're not going to really be basic attacking structures all that much. Like, if it wasn't for that, this would be a very good thing to use because you could just shoot at structures all day. The problem is, when you're pushing lanes, your minions are going to be up ahead for you, so you're not going to have to worry about like spamming basic attacks. As soon as you recharge, you're firing off your Withering Fire. If you're not, you're not playing it right. So there's really no need for this. So the one you definitely want to go with is Barb Shot, which Withering Fire deals 200% bonus damage to minions and mercenaries. Let me tell you right now, this talent 1 is so, there's a reason why I'm rambling about this one talent so much, is because people literally decide what kind of Sylvanas player they want to be right at talent 1. By picking with the wind, you get no bonus damage whatsoever. All you do is get range you don't need. With Barb Shot, with that 200% damage bonus, you're taking everything out way faster. And that doesn't just go away, that stays with you the entire time. So in the late game, again, like I said before, you're literally running through minions and mercenaries in seconds. Seconds. It's not even close. And with the upgrades that you're going to be getting to your Shadow Dagger as well, it just piles on. It's easy. Barb Shot is definitely the way to go because it's something that you see the effect of immediately, whether it's the start of the game, the middle of the game, or the end of the game. This talent resonates the entire way. Moving on to level 4, paralysis is definitely the way you want to go. It increases the duration of black arrows by 100%. So basically what this means is that those stuns last a lot longer. So like there's really no downside to this whatsoever. There is zero downside to using paralysis, and it's definitely the way that I go. Overflowing Quiver gives you a free Withering Fire at max charges. Whenever you would gain a Withering Fire charge from killing a minion or a hero while at maximum charges, it is automatically fired. Again, this is kind of one of those talents that looks good on paper, but you really don't need it. And honestly, if you get a full quiver and you're around targets, there's really no reason to save them. You should be firing these off as much as possible because these really do not affect your mana at all. So you definitely want to be firing these things off as much as possible. Ranger's Ambush. Haunting Wave refills Withering Fire. I suppose this could be another good viable talent, but the problem is that you shouldn't be using Ranger's Ambush to basically initiate fights. You shouldn't be using this to teleport into confrontation. You should be using this to get away from confrontation. So that alone kind of negates the whole purpose of this. Otherwise, this is basically like what Vala has when she vaults and gets back a her Q ability. I forgot what it's called, but when you vault, you can get back a Q ability right away. Like, this is basically similar to that. So I definitely say you would steer clear of this because you don't want to use Banshees to initiate fights. In Venom, this has been a completely different talent ever since they switched it from, I think it used to be 5 seconds. It activates poison to an enemy hero, dealing 180 damage over 10 seconds, and I believe before it was 5 seconds, which meant that the 180 points of damage definitely went through faster, obviously, which made it a lot more viable. Now at 10 seconds, basically your target has a lot of time to get away and kind of heal and negate the fact that you put the venom on them. So I see a lot of Sylvanas users still using this, but I really wouldn't advise it. I definitely think paralysis is the way you want to go. And the thing about this build is that it's not only viable against minions. It's gonna seem like it is, but by the late game, after you hit level 10, basically, you're gonna start to notice that your burst damage is not only effective against minions, but all of a sudden it's good, really good against heroes as well. So stick with the build. If you want to try it, it's up to you. Definitely do not be swayed off of how these talents may seem like they're just geared towards siege damage, because if you use this build and you play it right and you're paying attention, you have the possibility, and I've done this before several times, so I'm not just talking out of my ass, you have a very strong possibility of leading in siege damage, hero damage, and XP. You can lead in all three with this, no problem with this build. So moving along to level 7, Life Drain is another one that I actually see a lot of people using. The Shadow Dagger heals for each enemy it spreads to. I suppose that this seems like a viable talent on paper. The problem is that it heals you for, it's not a problem. It heals you for 10 each time it spreads to a new enemy, and this can spread throughout an entire wave. So basically, this can heal you like up to 70 to 80 hit points, or health points, however you want to say it, which is not bad. But in the late, I guess this goes up with time. But this is definitely not the way. Like, there is actually a few not so bad talents on this list. The problem is the one that I'm going to tell you to pick is so much more viable than the other ones that it makes all of these not look so good. So Life Drain you definitely want to avoid. Remorseless is basically follow through, but for Sylvanas, where she gets a basic attack damage boost after using an ability. Again, on paper, this seems like a good one, but unfortunately where they place this, it does not make it viable, so you don't want to go with this. Mercenary Lord, nearby mercenaries are stronger. Siege and Bruiser mercenaries near your hero deal 50% more damage. This is another one that's really good on paper, but in all actuality, you're not going to want to, in my opinion, you're not going to want to capture camps and like always find yourself following those camps and supporting them and pushing to see where they go. You definitely, if you can roam with Sylvanas and take out other camps that are not being attended to, you'd rather do that than push with the camps you have taken over, because she's very good at that. Sylvanas is the kind of hero that you want to always know where she is. You want to pay super amounts of attention to her. You do not want to leave her alone anywhere, because that just spells bad news for your side. Moving along, Shade Form, Haunting Wave grants stealth. Yeah, you can basically turn invisible after the teleport. Activating the teleport does not break the stealth. Again, maybe if this was paired up with other talents, this would be a really good thing to use for its capability. But unstable poison is definitely, without question, the way you want to go. Minions and mercenaries that die under the effects of black arrows explode, dealing 75 damage to nearby enemies. I cannot begin to stress how effective this talent is right at level 7. Once you get poison, you become a whole nother animal, because your poison, basically every attack, everything you attack explodes. They explode and they deal that splash damage to whatever's near them. So essentially, you could like, it could be like a domino effect where you kill the front guy and then he explodes and the guy behind him gets weakened or just dies, and then so on and so forth. So you combine withering, the barbed shot that has 200% damage, and that keeps increasing by the level. So I mean, it goes not so much that it goes higher than 200%, but you get what I'm saying. Like, it gets stronger as you level up, obviously. So you combine the barb shot with the longer paralysis, that's going to make unstable poison that much more likely to happen, because they're going to be stunned for a lot longer. So this is basically when you start to become a real serious problem for the enemy team as far as pushing lanes or just in general, because that splash damage also affects heroes as well. Like, if they're standing next to a minion that explodes, they're going to be taking damage too. So just keep that in mind. Unstable poison at level 7 is definitely where you want to go. Level 10, Wailing Arrow, I already covered this, so I don't need to go into it. Level 13, here's where we have another talent that I see a lot of people picking because of hot slogs, and it just blows my fucking mind. With Evasive Fire, Withering Fire grants move speed. You gain 10% move speed for 2 seconds whenever an enemy is hit with Withering Fire, stacking up to 30%. Now, I suppose if there wasn't a 2-second time limit on this talent right here, this would be extremely viable, but it's only for 2 seconds. 2 seconds, and then it goes away. You do not need this speed boost. You can easily get away with your Banshees. A lot of the reason why I feel like some of these talents are not viable is because you should have your Banshees on deck for escapability. So do not bother with this. Overwhelming Affliction, Black Arrows slows heroes. Black Arrows now also applies to heroes, slowing their movement speed by 5% for the duration, stacks up to 5 times. Now this is another one that would be very good and very viable if it was somewhere else. But since it's not, I would definitely say, I mean, if you want to try it, I suppose it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. If you wanted to try it, just to see how it affects heroes, go for it. I don't pick it though because I feel a lot more comfortable with Splinter Shot, which Withering Fire hits a secondary enemy. So basically, this combined with everything else that I told you at Talent 1, 4, and 7, now you basically see like a second version of Sylvanas pop up in shadow form to shoot at a secondary target. So you're going to be killing things that much faster with Withering Fire now. Like, your Qs are going to be so insane with this build that you are going to be a serious problem for everybody past level 10. And having a secondary shot just like really pushes home the point with this build. Moving along to level 16, Windrunner can cast Haunting Wave twice. Now, let me just put this out there that I absolutely think this is an awesome talent. But again, because of where it's been placed, I do not think it's a viable option, because in my opinion, with this build, with my build, because this is my build, so I can basically, I have free reign to say whatever I want. Cold Embrace is definitely the most viable talent on this list right now. I know a lot of people love using Blood for Blood, and I have no problem with Blood for Blood whatsoever, but I just feel like for your money's worth, Cold Embrace, the Shadow Dagger makes enemies vulnerable, taking 25% more damage, but the range of the Shadow Dagger is reduced by 25%, which, trust me, is not noticeable at all. It is really not. But Cold Embrace, remember what I said at the beginning, you want to use your dagger to initiate fights. So whoever you throw this dagger at past level 16, they become vulnerable for you to spam them with your Withering Fire. This is when you really start to see that burst damage go from like very good to extremely good. And this this is basically like whenever people see you, they're gonna have to go the other fucking way because they at this point they're gonna know what they're getting hit with. And the most awesome thing about the cold embrace is that it doesn't just make the person you hit with the dagger vulnerable, but remember, like I told you before, the poison spreads from Shadow Dagger. So when the poison spreads with cold embrace, every target that it spreads to also becomes vulnerable. So if you're think about this, if you're going to a camp at level 16 with cold embrace, you initiate with the dagger. It makes the first target vulnerable, then spreads off to the other 3 targets, making them vulnerable as well. Where your second withering fire now, you're hitting 2 targets at once, basically, and they're both going to be vulnerable. Just think about how much damage that is and how fast you're going to be clearing out camps. There's a reason why I'm saying everything that I'm saying. You just need to try it, get used to it a little bit, and you will see exactly what I'm talking about, because this is without a doubt, in my mind, the best possible build you can have for Sylvanas as far as pushing lanes go and eventually, you know, like carrying your weight with the hero damage as well. There is nothing you cannot do with this build if you learn how to play the character properly. Moving on to level 20. As I've said in a previous video before, I'm not too fond of having a secondary talent like at level 20, using my level 20s to boost the heroic abilities, even though the enemy at the center of Wailing Arrow's explosion takes 50% more damage and are silenced for twice as long. The silence is actually really good. The 50% damage, I could take it or leave it. Again, in my opinion, you don't want to be using the Wailing Arrow. You're not using this for damage. You're using this for the silence ability. This is basically what turns the tide in team fights. If you can time it right, if you can land it on enough targets, this is basically what puts a scare into everybody that you're aiming at, basically. So adding damage and time is really not that critical. We're not even going to go this again. Level 20. This is what I was telling you. Now you'll be able to use this talent on mercenaries, but again, it's not a viable heroic in my opinion. It's not worth it, so we're just going to move along. If you feel the need to have more escapability with this build, if you don't feel like you have enough, I would definitely say Bolt of the Storm is where you want to go with this. But for the sake of my build, I definitely see no better option than Fury of the Storm. Basic attacks chain enemy minions and mercenaries. Every 5 seconds, your next basic attack will deal an additional 20 damage to the target and 20 damage to all nearby minions and mercenaries. So basically, this just spreads your damage through an entire wave, along with the damage you're already spreading with everything else. Like, it just makes you a juggernaut of a siege player. It really does. It is basically the Nexus Blades of a ranged character, even though Nexus Frenzy is really the Nexus Blades of a ranged character. But for, I guess for a specialist, I would say, this is like the icing on the cake to finish the build. Again, if you use this build the right way, you can effectively lead the team in siege damage, hero damage, and definitely XP. And again, not all of my builds are revolve around leading the way on the stat sheet, but this is definitely one of the rare ones that you will find yourself kind of looking like pretty goddamn good on the stat sheet. So moving along, we're just to wrap up this build really fast. Level 1, you want to go Barb Shot. Level 4, you want to go Paralysis. Level 7, you want to go Unstable Poison. This is kind of a big one. Level 10, you want to go Wailing Arrow. Level 13, you want to go Splinter Shot. Sorry about that. Level 16, there I go. Level 16, you want to go Cold Embrace. And finally, at level 20, you want to go Fury of the Storm. Trust me, this build brings results. As always, this is just the first half, the first detailed side of it. Sorry if I'm rambling too much, but this is definitely one of the heroes that I definitely wanted to be clear about, because there's a lot of debate over which way you should be going with this, and I personally feel like this is the best way to go as far as like what you're out there for. So if you want to see it in action, come back for the second half of this video. Thank you everybody for watching, and a big thank you for the viewer that actually nudged me to do this video faster than I was planning to. So as always, I appreciate all the support. This is Achilles LBT. As always, it's Achilles with the Z. Remember it.